Good afternoon and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland and this week's Full Scottish. My name is Isla Barker. On the programme this week, we are delighted to be joined by Simon Barrow. Simon is a researcher, writer who has co-edited and co-authored 5 books on Scottish and UK politics. He is a consultant for Scottish CND, a public policy specialist, and was for 7 years a member of the Ethics Council of the National Union of Journalists. Good afternoon, Simon.
Hello, good to be here.
And we are also delighted to be welcomed by Martin Docherty-Hughes. Martin was formerly the MP for Western Bartonshire and now runs a public affair consultancy. Good afternoon, Martin.
Nice to see you. You well?
Of course, very well. To start, we will begin with our Middle East update. 814 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza since the start of the October 2025 ceasefire, bringing a total number of Palestinians killed in Gaza since October 7, 2023 to 72,587. In Lebanon, Israel killed a journalist, Amal Khalil, in a double-tap strike. The number of journalists killed by Israel since October 2023 is now over 260. Israel denies targeting journalists, and as well as ambulances at this time. In Iran, the ceasefire continues as the Strait of Hormuz is blockaded by both the US and Iran, while talks in Pakistan were off, then on, then off again. So we'll start with Simon. With these talks going on and off, is there any hope, in your opinion, of an intervention that will ensure they not only go on, but go on until there is an actual result from them, instead of them ending preemptively?
Well, it's very difficult for anyone to answer that question, really, because the Trump policy is all over the shop. He's launched a war without any discernible war aims, etc. I think the Pakistanis will play a key role in this, actually, because it's clear that they are in conversation with Iran, and Iran does want a resolution to the war. What Trump is saying is that they have no cards to deploy, but that, of course, is not true. We had an ironic headline in the newspapers the other day saying that Trump had said that the Strait of Hormuz was open at the same time as Iran had actually struck 2 boats with missiles. So, it's a chaotic situation, but I think eventually there's got to be some kind of resolution, and the Pakistanis will play the key role in this.
Thank you. And so, Martin, why do you think, why would Pakistan be involved in these talks? They don't seem to have as much of a stake in the war as Iran, Israel, or the US does.
I think it's important for Pakistan in the kind of wider kind of Western Middle Asia area. I think for Pakistan there is a real impact on the economy. They are, developing very fast along with their even larger neighbour India, and they want to see stability. There's a clear cultural, historic and religious relevance. I think one of the big parts, Simon mentioned it as well in terms of what's going on, is it's good to see that they want to participate. It's whether or not the Trump administration wants to go along with international law. And if we get peace, that's important, but I think it has to be grounded firmly in international law, because it's by not staying with international law that we've ended up in the situation that we're in.
Thank you. And Simon, do you think the United Nations will become further involved in this conflict or the mediation of it?
Well, it's undoubtedly the case that international institutions are under enormous stress and pressure at the moment. But because of the global economic catastrophe occasioned by this chaotic war, a number of powers who would have conflicting interests around this will actually want to see a resolution, and I think will be applying an awful lot of pressure behind the scenes. And Martin is absolutely right about the regional interests, the reason that Pakistan is involved. The long-term issue is how to rebuild and re-strengthen international institutions and probably restructure them as well in a world in which the idea that strong men from particular countries would override international law and international diplomacy is a serious threat to global order. So that's going to be the task in the longer run.
Thank you. And Martin, do you think that the UK can or should become further involved in the mediation of the conflict? Keir Starmer has been quite adamant that the UK will not get involved, but do you think this could change?
The UK can only act in any way with key allies and partners. I think any kind of individual intervention, those days are long gone. You know, the UK does not kind of hit the kind of bar of being a major, I hate using the word power, we maybe use authority, political authority in the world anymore. And I think if they're doing any work behind the scenes with France, Germany, Italy, or other European states, that might bring some pressure, but on its own, I don't think it exerts much influence anywhere else in the world these days. Never mind in the conflict that's ongoing in Gaza and, of course, in southern Lebanon.
And Simon, do you think the UK could or should become more involved?
Well, I mean, I agree with what Martin has just said. Obviously, all powers, to use that contested word, that have any influence need to apply it at this stage. But I don't think the UK will be able to play any distinctive role. What it could do, of course, particularly in relation to Lebanon and what's supposed to be a ceasefire in Gaza, but is being violated by Israel all the time, is actually to stop supplying weapons and making the situation worse. That's certainly something it should be doing.
So there has been talk of further food shortages or fuel issues. And so do you think that these could become reality in the next few weeks, months? What do you think the timescale is here, Martin?
Yeah, I mean, there's huge impact across the kind of, I suppose I would say, Western Asia, Central Asia, and for the rest of us, we'll see food costs going through the roof, because even if there is a peace tomorrow, the infrastructure destruction in the region has been monumental. It'll take some time to get that running. There's the other kind of consequential impact. You know, we're looking at southern Lebanon, the destruction of that once beautiful country, and the continuation by the State of Israel of the murder of journalists reporting on what's going on there. It's horrific. So we can only hope that people try and put their best foot forward and try and bring this to a quick and steady conclusion, which will have a steady impact on the people who live there and for the rest of us.
Thank you. And Simon, as a member of the National Union of Journalists, how does this news of 260 journalists being killed in Israel make you feel?
Well, I mean, it's absolutely shocking and appalling. It's not news either. It's been going on for an extended period of time. And as Martin was saying about the war on Iran and the need not only to bring that to an end, but to re-look at international institutions. So we certainly need a new UN convention on the safety and independence of journalists. Existing international humanitarian law is being ignored far too often, and a specific binding treaty is needed to criminalise the targeting of journalists. You know, the National Union of Journalists parliamentary group, which is a cross-party group, has tabled a motion on impunity enjoyed by state forces, and is calling on the UK government to support a new UN convention. That's going to be very important. And of course, we have to demand accountability, specifically regarding the conflict in Gaza. We need to condemn the unprecedented rate of fatalities and demand that the International Criminal Court prioritise investigations into the killing of journalists. So we need not just to deplore, but to act.
Thank you very much. And now moving on to the United States. Has Donald Trump survived a second assassination attempt at the White House Correspondents' Dinner last night? Conspiracy theories are already all over social media, but Trump does seem very unlucky to be the target of two assassination attempts. So, start with Martin. How do you think an armed, alleged assailant could have entered the White House Correspondents' Dinner without being caught until shots were allegedly fired?
You know, I don't go down conspiracy theories. You know, I'm a big fan politically of the former Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme, and of course we're still trying to figure out how he was murdered. And there's a lot of conspiracy a long time ago. There's a lot of conspiracy theories around that. You know, the Correspondents' Dinner in Washington is a slightly different affair in the sense that it's in a hotel. This may have been a guest. I think that's a possibility. President Trump is vilified by a large demographic who might not like his politics in a very forceful fashion. And, you know, just be very clear that assassinations attempts are a very undemocratic method of engagement. It's against the law, it's murder. That needs to be very clear. And, you know, it is possible, you know, it's a big hotel, people could get in. just because you're the president of the United States, whether we agree with their policies or not, doesn't mean that you're safe 100% of the time, and people do slip through. So, guns are very prevalent in the United States. You can get easy access to them, and this is probably not going to be the last one I've seen.
Thank you. And Simon, this is the first time that Donald Trump, or President Donald Trump, has attended a White House Correspondents' Dinner. Why do you think he is doing this now? He is under great public scrutiny for his involvement with the Epstein files, the Iran war. Why do you think he now is deciding to be involved in this part of being president?
Well, of course, this particular occasion is one of the highlights of the political season in the United States. It's extremely high profile. Donald Trump enjoys that kind of profile. He clearly thinks he can talk himself out of and beyond any kind of crisis that exists at the moment. But the recent events are absolutely extraordinary because the security around the Correspondents' Dinner is unbelievably tight. I mean, the whole building was crawling with security agents. It appears that the person who got in and fired shots and thankfully didn't kill or seriously wound anybody, though apparently a security guard was hit and was protected by their bulletproof vest. But this is someone who was actually a guest at the dinner and is reported in the media as having carried a whole range of weapons, including guns and knives. I mean, how on earth anyone can get in is quite extraordinary. The previous apparent attempt on Donald Trump's life also raises a lot of questions which haven't been properly investigated. I entirely agree with Martin that we shouldn't go down the avenue of conspiracy theories, but there are clearly a whole lot of questions to be asked, and the sort of chaos around the Trump administration, that's the second time we've had to use this this word to describe it, certainly raises questions about the effectiveness of security. I mean, look at who's running the FBI at the moment, someone whose competence is questioned by all those with expertise. So, the questions mount and mount, but we mustn't forget that Donald Trump himself has stoked up an enormous amount of anger and hatred and threats against judges and public figures and politicians and so on. It's a very febrile atmosphere. It needs to be calmed down, but clearly he is at the epicenter of a storm of his own creation.
Thank you. Now, hopefully without leaning too far into conspiracy theories, the midterm elections are coming up. So do you think Donald Trump might have attended this White House Correspondents' Dinner to gain support for the Republican Party ahead of the elections, as it is possible the Republicans will be voted out given Donald Trump's previous actions? We'll start with Martin.
He's a politician. He's got to get publicity. So I suppose the basic answer is yes. I mean, you're going to find politicians in the lead up to the 7th of May are attending every public event that they can get their hands on, and Donald Trump is no different. His colleagues in the Senate and Congress, the midterms that are coming up in November will be a huge challenge to the Republican Party and also to his presidency. And therefore he's got to, it's what, rightfully do is get out there and talk to people. That's probably to his, a negative impact that he hadn't done it in the past, because, usually whether you agree with the president or not the day, this big press dinner is usually quite a good affair for presidents and journalists to engage. So it's not wrong. It's the right thing to do is to be there, but you're not wrong about the impending impact of the midterms that the Republican Party are probably terrified of.
Thank you. And Simon, do you think that this could have a correlation with the upcoming midterm elections or the Iran war, possibly?
Well, actually, there's a kind of particular history of Donald Trump with the Correspondents' Dinner, because I think it was in around about 2015 that Barack Obama famously singled it out and made jokes of him, and some people even said that played a role in his decision to go ahead with his own initial presidential bid. So Donald Trump looks at everything from the point of view of his own personal interests, his own financial interests, his ego, and so on. I think that's the primary way to interpret almost anything that he does in public. Of course, the midterms are going to be very significant indeed. And as the defeat of Orban, another far-right leader, has shown, it's incredibly important that people turn out and vote in large numbers against the disturbing authoritarian trends that are happening in the United States, including the numerous ways in which the Trump administration is going to try and swing the midterms in any nefarious way that they can. There's been a huge amount of gerrymandering. There are going to be legal attempts to restrict the number of people who can vote. There will be no doubt legal attempts to challenge votes that go against Trump's interests and so on. So democracy is going to be at stake in those midterm elections, and they are incredibly important. And of course, that is playing somewhat on Trump's mind, no doubt. But there are many other factors, the war in Iran, Epstein, and so on, that are crowding round on him at the moment. And he really is a man under huge pressure. And there are great divisions, not only within the Republican Party, but even within the MAGA movement as well. And I think that's why he's wanting to get out there and continue to talk and to bluster and to advocate for himself when he has the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson going against him. He's in serious trouble.
Thank you. And so King Charles III is planning a state visit to the United States. Do you think because of this alleged attempt on the president's life, he may cancel?
No. No, don't think so.
Okay. How come? What makes you think you would not cancel or delay?
Well, the king is the head of state. Whether you're a monarchist or a republican, the monarch has a role. This takes a lot of planning. The system that that they're all involved in is used to this type of I won't going to say event, but this type of activity ongoing in political life, and they'll tighten security and it'll just go ahead. It's you just get on with it in that sense.
And
I mean,
Simon?
I think, well, I mean, I do think it's extraordinary that it was extraordinary before the recent events, but it's even more extraordinary now that this state visit is going ahead. Keir Starmer said, well, it's down to the palace, etc. That's completely untrue. It's actually the decision of the government as to whether such an event should go ahead. I think because Starmer has been trying to court Donald Trump without very much success in the long run, that's why the visit was planned. It was clearly an appeal to Trump's ego. But it's an extraordinary situation, and heaven knows how the palace is going to handle it, but they'll have to find a way.
Yeah.
Thank you. And speaking of Prime Minister Keir Starmer, on Monday, Sir Keir Starmer made a statement to the House of Commons about the appointment of Peter Mandelson. Ollie Robbins then gave contradictory evidence to the Foreign Affairs Committee on Tuesday. Is Starmer's position safe until the 7th of May? So we'll start with you, Martin. Do you think that this inconsistent account or investigation into the appointment of Peter Mandelson will impact Labour, Scottish Labour and Welsh Labour's chances in the elections, despite them not being involved as much with Westminster?
Well, I would maybe disagree in that kind of description of them. They're essentially part of the UK Labour Party because there is only one Labour Party within the United Kingdom, and it is based in London, and Keir Starmer is its leader. It's not only the Mandelson/Epstein link which is damaging, and since the dreadful decision to take the winter fuel payment off pensioners, there has been just one failed strange policy decision after another, and that speaks about I would say a kind of endemic failure of political leadership, because what you want is stability. It might sound a wee bit old-fashioned and boring, but you want stability at the top. You want that person to be seen as steering the ship as it goes through stormy waters, especially the way the world is today. And I think what you see through all of these big issues, critically the ones over the last couple of days with Peter Mandelson's situation, is at its core a failure of political leadership. and that will probably come to fruition after the elections, not just in Scotland and in Wales, but also the local government elections in England will be the ones that will be the real catalyst, because I think that's where their biggest fear is that reform will really push not just Labour, but even the Tories out of local government across the length and breadth of England, and that will terrify them. But at the end of the day, when it comes to Mandelson, when you saw Diane Abbott's question to the Prime Minister on his last statement, they all knew who Peter Mandelson was. And, they knew what his activities were, who his friends were. And yet the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland still thought it was a good decision to put him forward to become the next ambassador to the biggest foreign policy posting in the UK government. It was an insane decision, and it's all playing out.
Thank you. And Simon, do you think Keir Starmer and by extension Labour are safe until the 7th of May?
Well, goodness, let's step back a little bit and look at what's happened here, because Martin said, that it's a major failure of leadership and competence. It undoubtedly is. I mean, Keir Starmer told the House of Commons on Monday that it beggars belief that civil servants had withheld information regarding Mandelson's failed security vetting. He claimed he had never been informed by the UK security vetting system that they had recommended denying Mandelson clearance due to his past links, which we have to remember includes Epstein and interest in Russia and so on. And effectively, he blamed the civil service for the oversight. And that led to the sacking of Ollie Robbins. And then Ollie Robbins turns up on Tuesday to give testimony to the Foreign Affairs Committee, and he directly challenges Starmer's narrative. He says that there was constant pressure and constant chasing for Number 10 to push the appointment through quickly, and that the Cabinet Office under the PM's authority originally argued that vetting Mandelson was unnecessary, a point the Foreign Office reportedly resisted. The discrepancy is that if Starmer's office was applying pressure to bypass or rush through vetting, it undermines his claim that he was a passive victim of civil service failure. So it's a massively serious issue. As far as May the 7th is concerned, I mean, it would be extraordinary for a political party to remove its leader just less than 2 weeks away from an election. I don't think that's going to happen. As Martin says, it will highlight the dependence of the Scottish and Welsh Labour parties on the UK Labour Party. In fact, former Scottish First Minister Henry McLeish recently went on record saying how basically everything that he did had to be approved from the UK, and he wasn't even allowed to change the name of the then Scottish executive to Scottish Government, which happened subsequently. So that's one factor, but it will be what happens in England that is going to be decisive for Starmer's future, along with Mandelson. And he's under pressure on one side from Reform, but also from the Greens, who are taking votes from the left all over the place in England, and are going to obviously have a massive showing. So, the two-party system as a whole is under threat from current circumstances, and we can only hope that something better and more accountable emerges.
Yeah, I've just maybe when I can in there, Isla, as well, when back what Simon said is that what we've maybe not talked about is the impact on the civil service. And when Ollie Robbins was giving his evidence to committee the other day, and I watched the entirety of it and noticed who was sitting behind him, and it was the General Secretary of the FDA trade union, and who is, the head of the senior civil service trade union. And he wasn't a happy man. And he wasn't a happy man when he appeared on Newsnight that evening. And clearly, from what I can tell, the senior civil service across the whole of the UK are not happy. And it's not a good place to be if you're the Prime Minister in trouble, to have those people who are doing their job to the best of their ability under very difficult circumstances, trying to help you out, and you throw them under the bus.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, it's worth saying the FDA, for those who don't know, is the First Division Association, as Martin said. It's the senior civil servants, and actually, the civil service is crucial for the effective functioning of government. And when you start to sow discord like that, it's going to affect other issues of policy implementation and executive action as well.
Thank you. And so, Simon, why do you think Keir Starmer would, or anyone would have said that vetting Peter Mandelson was unnecessary? Why would he have been exempt from this standard procedure?
Well, there's no logical answer to that, obviously, and the real issues at the moment is who is telling the truth in this situation, who will be held accountable for it. But it raises a whole lot of questions about the way the UK government has been operating. And actually, back at the end of 2024, I co-edited and co-wrote a book on the first 100 days of Labour and where it was going at the moment. And it's just fallen apart at the seams since then. I mean, Labour is at a historic low in the polls. So clearly something is going to have to be done about leadership in the long run. But this just highlights how bad things have got and how trust has broken down, both within the political system, but also it will be breaking down within the civil service at the moment. And that can't be allowed to go on.
Thank you. And Martin, do you think that these contradictory statements or this inquiry could lead to a further trial or an investigation into Keir Starmer, the civil service, or Peter Mandelson?
Do you know, when Parliament tries to investigate, we need to be mindful, especially if you look at select committees, and I sat on one for many years, is that at the end of the day, you're powerless. It's not like a Senate committee or a Congress committee in the United States or in parliamentary committees in other countries. There is no right to demand that someone turns up to give evidence. You're not forced to swear under oath. Therefore, the investigatory powers of Parliament are limited. I think what we will consistently see is just a drip feed of bad news. And that then comes down to destabilising the leadership, and those who are supportive at the moment, who may not be supportive in public, but not necessarily behind closed doors, will start to come out and say that it's time for a change, and that time might come sooner rather than later.
So then, do you think Sir Keir Starmer would willingly attend a trial or give evidence, and if not, then
No.
why?
No, I mean, there's no way that the British Prime Minister is going to be put in trial by anyone at this moment in time. You know, when you look at what Boris Johnson, there was that many prime ministers when I was in Parliament, keep forgetting their names. When Boris Johnson left the House of Commons, you know, I think the only one that stood up in the chamber and said he should be at the bar and under trial. You know, that's not going to happen. And you know, what is about accountability for Parliament to take its role seriously, to flex its muscles. It has those muscles, it just rarely uses them, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
Thank you. Now moving on to the Scottish elections. Are descriptions of the Scottish elections as lacklustre a true reflection of what is happening? And does the independence movement appreciate the risks of a low turnout? So, Martin, what do you think the SNP would do if, in the event of a second independence referendum, the public votes for no? How would they execute their policies or continue as a party?
Well, they voted no the last time and we're still here. And, well, first of all, I don't speak on behalf of the SNP. I'm just a plain party member. I hold no position within the party, so I can't speak on their behalf. But I would, having seen our country lose the referendum the last time, but I would say I think the country would win the next time. That's not about the SNP. It's not about any specific party. It is about the nation and about the country making decisions. And in any democracy, you can have the point to disagree. So I don't think it's a position in which we can think about until we get to a referendum. I'm happy to have a chat about what we think are how we'll make sure that the turnout is high in the 7th of May. A low turnout delegitimises not only the authority of any incoming government, it could do that, but it allows your opponents, whatever party you're in, to delegitimise you as well. We've seen that through previous UK party leaders saying, while the SNP might have won, the majority of seats, maybe has to have a minority government, and whilst we have a majority pro-independence parliament, they delegitimise that narrative by saying, well, you're not winning majority seats, which of course the Scottish Parliament was set up to make sure that you never did win a majority of seats. So let's just see how the 7th of May pans out, I would say, and happy to have a chat about the future when the future happens.
Thank you. And so Simon, do you think that these ideas of the upcoming elections being lackluster will dissuade people from voting or downplay the importance of the elections?
Well, I think persuading people to go out and vote depends on there being something at stake. One of the significant things about the 2014 referendum was that it was a record in terms of turnout, because perhaps for the first time in many years, people in Scotland saw that there was a real choice there of taking our destiny into our own hands and so on, which could result in a fundamental change that they've been looking at for some time. Now, these elections are of a very different character, but at the heart of these elections is a cost of living crisis, is the future of our public services and the NHS, of our long-term future in terms of the environment and a shift away from dependence on fossil fuels, the extraordinary energy future that Scotland has. I mean, we have such a significant proportion of Europe's on and offshore renewable energy potential. That hasn't really featured so much in this election. You'd hope that it would get more attention because it's about economic and environment and social and human security in the long run as well. So if the election has lacked a bit of spark so far, and as I say, we have just under 2 weeks to go. It may all take off next week, who knows? It's because the main contenders haven't really put those fundamental issues at the front of their offers. And on the other hand, I think that as far as turnout is concerned and so on, people do recognise that action on the NHS, action on public services, which both the SNP and Labour and the Greens have put at the front of their concerns in the manifesto, is something that makes a huge amount of difference to people's everyday lives. So it's up to the candidates to persuade people to vote. As far as the independence question is concerned, Martin is quite right in his analysis of this. Understandably, John Swinney has said that an outright SNP majority will send a strong message for independence, but it's very likely that there's going to be a substantial majority of independence parties, the SNP and the Greens at Holyrood, and that can't be ignored by the UK government. I mean, there's a serious democratic deficit emerging. It's actually going to turn into a constitutional crisis at some stage. It's just not viable for Westminster politicians to effectively turn around and say to people in Scotland, it doesn't matter what you vote, we're just going to go on ignoring your wishes. I mean, that is not how democracy works, and a crisis will emerge. So, one way or another, these elections are going to be quite significant, both for domestic policy in Scotland, but also for the constitutional future.
Thank you. And Martin, with these multiple reports from different publications describing the elections as lackluster, why do you think they would say this? This is a national election for two countries within the UK. How could anyone say this is lackluster?
I've been in it a long time, and I first got elected in 1992, and some journalists, not all of course, and the media would report that politics is lackluster, no one is debating it, but I don't necessarily agree with that. If you're sitting in a pub on a Friday night and everyone's having a wee chat, and some of us are age we're probably in the pub more often than we should be, but I don't agree. There is a undercurrent of concern, I think, for a range of people about the rise of reform. I think there is an undercurrent where people are concerned about areas around the NHS. We talked about, and sometimes before, about in England they're selling off your data and impacts like that. So we want to say a clear no to that. And, there's only a couple of parties saying no to that in both Scotland and in Wales. There are a range of issues I think that people do find important, and they do see a clear difference between the way things are done in Scotland, Wales, and in England. Yeah. I don't think it's lackluster. I just think that's clickbait, and at the end of the day, the only way they're going to know is on election day, and when we're counting the ballots. That's when we find out. And the only way to make a democracy effective is to participate, and that's up to us as individuals, but also as political communities across our country, and that's up to us to do it. And that's, the political parties need to make that pitch. But I would also urge anyone watching today who doesn't want to vote and doesn't agree with any of the parties that please at least go and spoil your paper. People died to get you to vote.
Thank you. And Simon, you mentioned a potential democratic crisis. So what do you think this could look like?
Well, I mean, what I'm saying simply in the long run is that you cannot operate as a democracy and go on ignoring the wishes of voters. The SNP has been in power for, will have been in power for 20 years if it comes out as the largest party in this election. And independence has been the constant demand that that party has made, but also the Greens, and also there's a much wider independence movement in Scotland, and the polls have shifted as well. I think it's about 15 of the last 21 polls have shown a majority for independence. And certainly, I mean, I've just been at the Scottish Trade Union Congress. The trade unions are divided on the constitutional question, but they're almost unanimous in saying that it's Scotland's right to decide it. How long can that right be denied? It becomes more and more crucial as time goes on. And, we're now talking at, 2014 through to 2026, 27. Many years have elapsed. The dial has shifted, if anything, even more towards independence and towards dissatisfaction with the current constitutional arrangement. That cannot go on being ignored. But the answer is that what's needed is political pressure, mobilisation, both within civic society, which is happening to a certain extent, but also within the political system more widely. And I mean, I think that perhaps one of the disappointing things about this election at the moment is that there's been no real substantial new offer as to the prospects of independence, what difference it could make in transforming Scotland. And, the real issues will kick off after the election on the 7th of May, both in terms of how to handle the severe pressures that exist within the economy and within public services, particularly in Scotland, but also the constitutional question, how we begin to reboot that as a way of addressing Scotland's long-term needs, as well as the short-term crisis of cost of living and all the other things that people are having to face in their daily lives.
Thank you, Simon. And Martin, how do you think, as Simon mentioned, the people of Scotland could determine the future of their lives, such as the NHS or the cost of living crisis?
Well, that's, if you believe in a democratic system, you either go out and vote for parties or individuals who you think will have an effective answer to some of your questions. Government is a slow-moving beast. It takes time to plan, it takes time to implement, and no matter who is elected and forms the next Scottish government, there will be time required to implement their policies. I think we live in a time where everything's, we want it now. It's instantaneous. It's on Instagram. Why can't we have it as well? So that's not how real life works. You've got a lot of people who work in the public sector who would need to change practices, who would look at different forms of how money's coming into their, say, the NHS, different departments. That could take a whole parliamentary session, if not two. So I think we need to be more realistic, first of all, as a country. We need to be more real, and that's not about a constitutional question, that's just about the reality of how government works, and not just the Edinburgh level as a national government, but also local government. And we also have to be more realistic about our asks. And we also need to, not only as individuals, but as communities, I would say, participate more, being more involved, not just joining a political party or joining your local trade union, but participating in your community. And those are drivers of social and political change, not just going to a ballot box. That matters, of course, because that's how you elect your government. But a real social democratic country that some of us would hope exists in this country only works if we participate at a community level with our neighbours, with our friends and with our families.
Thank you. Now, at the STUC conference in Dundee this week, there was a Scottish CND fringe event on nuclear weapons. Simon, you were in attendance of this event as well as several others. How do you think the STUC conference went on? And we have a video with Anne Henderson from that event.
In 2024, the union passed a motion headed Peace is a Labour Movement issue, which absolutely clearly laid out that there was an increased danger of armed conflict between nuclear powers, that the best traditions of trade unionism must include working for peace, and there's no contradiction with defending good jobs and working conditions. And we committed at that time, that was 2024, to strengthen our relationship with organisations such as CND and organisations campaigning for peace globally and in Britain, and to campaign for socially useful, well-paid unionised jobs, and building a campaign for defence diversification based on the principles of just transition. Now, so that political position adopted by the AGM took the RMT into being part of the body that pulled together the Alternative Defence Review. Now, this was produced in response to, it was actually published because the slight delay in dates of the publication of the government Strategic Defence Review. It was published slightly before it, but the arguments are run right through. So this is available online on the Scottish CND website and the UK CND website. There's also a handful of them still on the stall in the hall. And so this brought together trade unions and academics and peace studies, different bodies to put this together. It's a really useful piece of work. So just kind of like, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, but just kind of references like a really good resource because it does give you a bit of context as to how we got, how the previous Conservative government got us, and indeed previous American government, but got us to where we are now. But I think having been listening to the debates at the STUC, the discussions at STUC the last couple of days, the language that we use about global solidarity and international movement, what we have in common as a working class across the world, it just, like when you translate that into the way that the British government's defence strategy is being prepared, it just cuts right across. It doesn't work, so we've got to try to get a discussion going in the wider population as well as our workplaces, which is about what do we mean when we say we want to build peace in the 21st century? What does that look like? What does global security actually mean? And it's such a scary time internationally at what we actually see round about us. There's no way that the argument that we've got greater security for British citizens by having the Trident submarines on the Clyde or by rearming our country as the narrow defines of, it doesn't make people safer, it doesn't make British citizens, it's not what we talk about as a labour movement. Absolutely clear that those who hold the most weapons have not got any interest in making a safer world.
Thank you. And so, Simon, you were in attendance and also with other events at the STUC. So how do you think the events involved spoke about nuclear disarmament or were pro-nuclear weapons?
Well, first of all, I should say that I was more than in attendance. I actually organised that fringe meeting. You were hearing from Anne Henderson, who is the political and policy advisor for the RMT in Scotland. And the Scottish Trades Union Congress actually passed an important composite rejecting the argument that's been put forward by the UK government for a massive expansion in defence spending as the best way either to achieve security for the country and certainly to further the economic interests of the majority there. And that particular fringe meeting, which also, I think very importantly, had Richard Hardy from Prospect, which is one of the unions that has workers in the defence sector who are concerned about their future, concerned about their jobs. And the main aim of it was actually to prefigure further research in Scotland, which I'm involved in, which is looking really at the industrial and energy landscape of Scotland, the question of Scotland's defence as part of that and what's appropriate to it. Large-scale projects are really yesterday. We need to look at cybersecurity, we need to look at maritime defence and so on. And also then to look at the jobs that are connected at the moment to the Trident nuclear system being based in Scotland, and what the alternatives are. And we're looking at a diversification agency which will help Scotland in the short, medium and long term to move away from nuclear dependence and fossil fuel dependence to the renewables future and the future of human security that we really want to see for our country. So it was the beginning of a conversation, and I think the beginning of an important conversation. There's been lots of talk about defence diversification, but we really need concrete answers to questions about how we put that into practice. And I think the last comment I'll make at this stage, Martin will have comments on this because it's an issue that he has considerable expertise and interest in as well, is that the UK government's committed to enormous increases in military spending. Basically an extra 40 billion on top of the current 66.3 billion through to 2035. And the problem is, what is this money being spent on? There's a huge lobby from arms companies to invest in large projects and so on. But we're dealing with a situation where security in modern warfare hasn't just changed, it's undergone a massive revolution. It's an era where, it used to be the case that superpowers could dictate to others, but now a $500 dollar drone can take out a $10 million tank or a multi-billion dollar aircraft system. So we need to be rethinking both defence and its relationship to the economy, but particularly we need to be thinking about the danger of the sighting of nuclear weapons in Scotland and the threat that poses to us in an increasingly unstable world.
Thank you. And Martin, with the Trident submarines being kept in Scotland, do you think with an independence movement they would either be pushed out of Scotland or completely disarmed altogether? What do you think the end game is?
Well, I think the vast majority of those who are involved in the pro-national movement are opposed to nuclear weapons in Scotland. I can't imagine that changing after independence. Things do happen, I suppose, but I can't imagine that. That, again, would up to me. We always suppose about what our country's going to look like after independence and making people's minds up for them, but we'll leave that to them. At the moment, that's the future, but I would say I always hope that we would continue in a moral, political and in a defence perspective reject nuclear weapons, because from my perspective, having been involved, as Simon alluded to, in this arena for a number of years, is that deterrence only manages risk. It doesn't reduce it.
Yeah.
And, I thought it's a role, especially from my political perspective as a social democrat, that when it comes to defence and security, your role as a Democrat is to reduce that risk in a way that we can see and judge it as citizens. And if you were to judge the way in which the UK government, not just from a Labour perspective, but also previous Conservative governments and also those in coalition with Liberal Democrats, is that there has been a failure at the top to deal with some of the systemic issues in the MOD. If you put the nuclear issue aside, I would find myself constantly agreeing with colleagues in committee from other parties when it came to the kind of management of personnel. The endemic failures of pay, endemic failures of treatment, the treatment of women and minority communities within the Armed Forces service structure. Even today, after the Atherton report, I sat in that committee when Sarah Atherton was chairing the subcommittee into that, and it was deeply disturbing. And these issues are at the core of how the ministry is run, and that continues to impact the bigger defence projects because there's an ethos there, and that ethos needs to change, whether it's within the UK or I would hope as Scotland as an independent nation state, is that I'm not opposed to Scotland having an armed forces. I'm very supportive of that one, but I think Scotland should have an armed forces which is fit for purpose and has a specific role within Northern Europe, and that is critically across our northern flank and the Icelandic Gap. The UK has failed on that for decades, and they're now only putting one of the carriers up there because the Americans were basically telling them, come on, get on with it. I could tell you a story about that for another day, but interesting conversations with American colleagues about the failure of the UK in the North Atlantic. And I would imagine that Scotland, like Norway, would continue to play its part in the North Atlantic in defending our values as a democratic state.
Thank you very much. And moving on to our Ukraine update. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky signed deals on security and energy cooperation with his Azerbaijani counterpart Ilham Aliyev in Baku on Saturday, as Kyiv seeks to leverage its experience in defending its airspace from Russia after the latest wave of conflict in the Middle East that began with US-Israeli strikes on Iran in late February. Multiple nations have sought Ukraine's assistance and expertise in downing Iran's long-range drones. Zelensky has also sought to reinvigorate peace talks with Russia, which were being mediated by the US, until it became more focused on its campaign against Iran. The Ukrainian leader said he had discussed with Aliyev the possibility of having a meeting between Ukraine and Russia in Azerbaijan. 10 people have been killed in Russian attacks on the southeastern Ukrainian city of Dnipro and other regions. 2 more were killed in northern Ukraine. A Ukrainian drone attack in Sevastopol in Russian-annexed Crimea killed 1 man and wounded 3 other people, according to the city's Moscow-installed governor. The Speaker of Russia's parliament, a close ally, President Vladimir Putin, arrived in North Korea on Saturday to attend an event to commemorate Pyongyang's deployment of troops to help Moscow in its war on Ukraine. North Korea has sent an estimated 14,000 troops to fight with Russian forces in Ukraine. More than 6,000 of them had been killed, according to South Korean, Ukrainian, and Western officials. A drone crashed in Romania on Saturday after Russian drone strikes in neighboring Ukraine. Romanian authorities said that more than 200 people have been evacuated. Romania is a NATO member and has repeatedly seen its airspace violated and drone fragments fall on its territory since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. And today is the 40th anniversary of the Chernobyl disaster, when explosions blew the top of the nuclear reactor, causing the world's worst nuclear accident. To mark the occasion, my colleague Ewan Hughes interviewed Dr. Alan Flowers and Professor Maxim Yasinski from Lviv yesterday, ahead of the Chernobyl Day commemoration events taking place in Ukraine today. We will be playing out today's program with that interview. So, we'll start with Martin. With the growing pressure to disarm and also diversify the energy profile of the country to reach net zero, do you think that Scotland would try to move towards nuclear power or continue its investment in solar, wind and wave energy?
That was a good crossover between Ukraine and nuclear power in Scotland. I can't imagine anyone in Scotland in their right mind would want to invest in nuclear power. It's highly expensive. It's a long-term risk again, and I used to always be concerned that, as a former MP, that we never talked about the failure of the national grid to invest in Scotland's renewable energy, especially in the northeast coast and in the far northwest. Some major investment to link up new renewable offshore wind energy and wave energy would push us as a global supplier of green, carbon-free energy. And this kind of tells you the way in which the nuclear industry, I think, at least from my personal perspective, has a loud voice in Parliament. And the green energy industry really needs to kind of level that up a bit and be as involved in that debate. And that also means that National Grid really needs to invest in those links between northwestern Scotland and northeast Scotland. So huge opportunities there, but I don't think for a minute that Scotland at this moment in time would think that nuclear power is the answer to that.
Thank you. And Simon, do you have anything to add on the commemoration day of the disaster?
Yeah, well, obviously the thing that links Ukraine to this debate is Chernobyl, and that's a deadly reminder of the dangers that come with nuclear power, which I think we've somewhat lost sight of. But I mean, the most important thing I think to say is that Scotland doesn't need nuclear power because, it has vast wind, tidal and hydro resources that already generate more than enough renewable electricity to meet its domestic need. While it also has a clear path to net zero without the long-term waste or expense of nuclear reactors and the enormous amounts of subsidy. And there is a huge lobby at the moment for nuclear power targeting Scotland. And there are really 2 impetuses behind that. First of all, the pro-nuclear weapons lobby recognise that whilst you can have nuclear power without nuclear weapons, you can't have nuclear weapons without nuclear power. So that's one element of the lobby from the military industry, but also fossil fuel companies have had something of a let-off with the Trump administration coming into power because, of course, he's rowing back completely on renewables and wanting to reinvest in fossil fuels. But they know that in the long run, their game is up. We're going to have to move to a renewable future for the sake of the preservation of the entire planet, amongst other things. And so what they've done is to say, well, actually, maybe we should be looking to switch to nuclear power because that's where the massive public subsidies are coming from, much more than in renewables. And we need, therefore, to resist that self-interest and look at a rational, sustainable energy future for Scotland, which has to be renewable based because that's where all our resources are. So I think it's very important to go on having that debate, to remember the dangers and costs of nuclear power, but also the need to massively reinvest in Scotland's renewable future. And for example, if there's going to be a windfall tax on fossil fuel companies who are going to make quite a lot of money out of the current crisis and so on, Scotland should be demanding that a good proportion of that should be coming to the northeast of Scotland, because we need a joined up industrial strategy with just transition away from fossil fuels at its heart. We haven't really got that at the moment. We're moving in that direction, but not nearly fast enough, and that's where the resources really need to go.
Thank you. And Martin, what other political parties, what have the other political parties said on potential nuclear disarmament or even nuclear expansion? Do other parties agree with the SNP?
Well, I think there's a couple of parties that agree across the piece. I mean, the SNP and the Greens have a clear defined anti-nuclear position. I think there are strong elements within the British Labour Party who are anti-nuclear, but they're no way anywhere near the majority in any shape or form. And I think in terms of political parties, that would be it. I think the big difficulty for us now in the way the world is that we can't imagine, with everything that's going on in Ukraine, and having, I think Simon and I are both of an age where we lived through Chernobyl, and the impact, of Chernobyl here in the UK was that I think up until about 2012 there were certain restrictions on meat in certain parts of the UK were not allowed to be sold for public use. So we can't imagine that any of us, even with peace in Ukraine tomorrow, is going to disappear overnight. And as an old-fashioned social democrat, it means hard work in terms of getting people to get back around the table and talk about verifiable arms control, and about future diplomatic efforts to really bring down that nuclear signaling, and that includes the Russian Federation, who are consistent in talking about a nuclear option. And that's where we need to now, I think, focus ourselves in making sure these people are brought back in to talk about reducing the risk and not just managing it for all of us.
Thank you very much. And that brings this week's Full Scottish to a close. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regularly monthly payment, thank you very much. We can only exist with your support. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you, and thank you again to our guests Simon Barrow and Martin Docherty-Hughes.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Great to see you.
Good to see you too. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.
We are joined by nuclear physicist Dr. Alan Flowers and Professor Maxim Yasinski. Hello, Alan. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm sitting here in a beautiful sunny Lviv in western Ukraine today.
So we're talking to you down the line in Ukraine. Can you tell us a bit why you're in Ukraine?
Well, I'm in Ukraine because on 26th of April, we'll be commemorating the 40th anniversary of the Chernobyl accident. And for many years, I've had an academic cooperation with a university that uses the description life safety. It's a university that trains civil protection specialists now. And in the Soviet period, they were a fire officer training college. So this university that I've had a long cooperation with, they have alumni that were involved in the Chernobyl liquidation process, and I'll be looking forward to meeting on this visit some of these liquidators and honouring the work they did 40 years ago. And the new current fire officers, they will have a ceremonial parade, and we'll be laying wreaths in commemoration of those that died doing the firefighting at the Chernobyl accident.
Thank you. Hello, Maxim. How are you?
I'm nice. Thank you.
Can you tell us a bit about your exhibition, which is opening in Lviv tomorrow?
Tomorrow we have a part of our exhibition which is dedicated to this date, 40 years from Chernobyl disaster, and we are making a part of this exhibition. It will be a big model of all environment, including the nuclear power, Pripyat, which is a city satellite of this nuclear power plant, and also city Chernobyl, which is 18 kilometers from nuclear power plant. And all this area is exclusion zone now, and it's have no life. I mean, registered life. Let's say it this way, because some people still live there in their homes, but it's not allowed to live there. So like that.
And we understand you previously organised an exhibition about Mariupol. Can you tell us a bit about that as well?
Yeah, it was really interesting exhibition. I just probably 2022 when our warriors had to leave the Mariupol, and it was really a bad day. And I decided that we should show it at some point. We should have some exhibition, or at least to show what catastrophic events were in Mariupol during this period of time, at the beginning of the war. And the most interesting, in my opinion, way to show it, to create a model with video mapping, on which will be a projection on this model with events. It will show events of what were in the city, and connected with the places on the model. So it's interesting to watch the model and interesting to watch the movie, which is shown on the model. And also we started to making research, because you can't do a good job if you didn't know about this object or something like that. So we did probably more than 1 year research about Mariupol, and find out that this city has much longer history. It's much older than the Soviet Union period and stuff like that. It's from 16th century, 17th century, and we wanted to show this history because it starts from that location, starts from first settlements of our Cossacks, and then it's life become more stable on that area. But also it was some tribes of other peoples much before, like before the Christ and stuff like that. So we decided to show all history of Mariupol and create a big exhibition, find some partners with also our partners Skyron, which also take part in this exhibition about Chernobyl, because they are making a lot of 3D scanning and photogrammetry models of different heritage, architectural heritage sites, and they have what to show on this exhibition, on the exhibition of Mariupol, and our cooperation become really interesting and successful, in my opinion. It was really good exhibition. I showed Alan some photos. Unfortunately, we were waiting, Alan, for this exhibition, but life is life, and nobody can know what will be tomorrow, and or will it be able to get in time in different places.
Fantastic. Dr. Flowers, with the Chernobyl disaster anniversary being tomorrow, to gain a little bit more historical context, can you explain what went wrong at the Chernobyl plant the night of the disaster?
Well, the operators were instructed to run an experiment which involved powering down the reactor and then switching off electrical power to to the reactor and to see if, under a low power condition, turbines could keep running to make electricity for the plant to keep going. And the unfortunate thing was, instead of them carrying out the powering down as they had intended, they got interrupted in the experiment. They got asked to put the power up. And that process caused forms of atoms to gather in the reactor that led to something that actually worked against the reaction happening. So you kind of had operators like trying to put their foot on the accelerator and also put their foot on, you had a brake that was sticking essentially. So it was rather like driving a car in a very difficult situation. When they realized something was going wrong, by then they'd had most of the control rods out because they were trying to accelerate the reactor against this process. That led to a very unstable situation. They decided they better get the control rods in as fast as possible. But unfortunately, in that situation, tips at the end of the rods with graphite caused a sudden rush in the reaction. So it was an unstable reactor that just suddenly, with the conditions it got into, started to get very, very hot. The first thing that happened was the fuel rod shattered, hot metal went into the water. It was a crazy mix of water, solid state graphite, and also uranium fuel. That created steam, and a massive steam explosion blew the roof off, but it wasn't all. It was so hot, the steam turned into hydrogen gas, the hydrogen met oxygen, and you got a chemical explosion. None of it was actually a nuclear explosion. So what happened in Chernobyl was, as a result of the unstable operating conditions they got into, it overheated. First of all, hot metal created a huge amount of steam as the fuel rods shattered. That caused a first explosion that blew the lid off the reactor. And then a second explosion was created by a hydrogen buildup, and that blew apart the reactor core. So you had very hot material going up into the atmosphere, and hence the very widespread distribution of radioactivity as a result of these two very powerful explosions that took place, almost just one after the other.
So would you have said that the disaster was more due to human error than as opposed to a technical error?
Well, if I remember, technical error, the design had a fundamental flaw in it, several flaws. This combination of building a reactor using solid state graphite, that's carbon, as part of the destruction, but also using water to cool it, that is not a combination used in the West. It had been looked into in the UK in the 1970s. And the physics of it can create terribly unstable situations if you get the control rods into, shall we say, unusual configurations. Control rods are these things that run in and out of the reactor, and variously, as the more control rod you put in, the more you slow the reactor down. The more you pull them out, it allows the reaction to go faster. And certain positions of these could lead to high power surges. Now, the problem is this was known. It's known in the West, so this type of reactor was just simply not constructed because of the risk that poor operation might get it into that situation. So what you had here was the operators, there was a problem and an error in the operators' understanding of what they were doing, partly because they didn't have all the information. They didn't know this bit about the fuel rods going in and the tips of them causing potential increase in reaction, it seems. So it was a combination of both. There was huge design error, and there was also human error, largely due to lack of training, but certainly a desire to do and finish this test experiment. Combination of the both is the answer.
Yeah. Moving more of the political implications of the disaster, would you blame the Soviets' handling of the disaster to the subsequent harm to human life? Obviously, it took 36 hours to evacuate the local town of Pripyat. Would you blame their handling of the Chernobyl disaster to obviously the harm that was caused to a lot of people, like radiation poisoning and like so?
Well, they were dealing, of course, with a huge, unexpected, unknown. And in terms of taking action and making a decision to move the local population, the population in the nearby city of Pripyat, just a couple of kilometers away, that probably being made essentially less than 36 hours after the accident, to get a fleet of several hundreds of buses to move a population of 40, nearly 50,000 people moved by the end of the Sunday afternoon. By this time, we've reached around about 40 hours after the accident. That was a pretty good organizational feat. At that time, you have to do the monitoring. You have to try and get an assessment of where the radioactivity's got to. But certainly, one could have argued, well, maybe swifter decisions on the Saturday might have just got the population out 12 or 15 hours earlier. There then, of course, is a much wider issue of the populations further out that in some cases lived for several years in contaminated regions before it was recognized that the risks of potential cancers were above what were then the recognized international norms. So there was a wave of evacuation from areas more than 30 kilometers, something like 30, even up distances of 150 kilometers, were evacuated in the period 89, 90, 91. And I myself personally saw evacuations, people departing these areas up to even the year 2000. It was a long, slow process. There were two levels of evacuation, those that were essentially forced. And the reason it took so long was there was a second level whereby people were given an option to leave, because many older people basically said, well, we'd rather stay here and live our life out. We're going to die anyway. And they were actually, in the outer regions, given that option. So, yes, there was definitely what became a very annoying, and it actually led to considerable political activism being supported both in Ukraine and in Belarus as a result of the way the Soviet authorities treated the population. And they could have issued iodine tablets, for example. Iodine blocks radioactive iodine getting into the thyroid, and that's very important in the first days after the reactor accident. Very little of that was issued, and that was a big annoyance, I know, personally, to many Belarusians and Ukrainians, that the necessary measures to prevent the effects were not taken.
And Professor Yasinski, how did these evacuations of Ukrainian people, how did that affect ordinary people in Ukraine?
This is a good question, because all people who were resettled from that area to other places, it's totally new life and new diseases that you couldn't imagine before, unfortunately. And it was spread in different parts of Soviet Union at that time. Some of them were settled on Western Ukraine, some in eastern parts, some in other places. But all of that people were separated, and life in Chernobyl city in Pripyat stopped, and that territory were lost for many years for living for ecology and stuff like that. So this is a big effect on life of that people who live there. But other people who live far from that areas, they heard about this disaster maybe 10 or 12 days. I I don't remember the day, but 26th of April, it was a first day when my mom. Okay, when I was born on 15th of April, 1986. So 26, it was my first day outside, and I didn't feel any changes, But it was a very good weather. Mom told me, and there were no effects for us. We didn't even know that it was a disaster on that era. So later, when it become spreaded this information, so we realized that we should take care a little bit better, and that's all. Some more effect, I don't know. Was it? I'm okay. A lot of my colleagues and friends from the childhood is also okay. We don't have any problems with because of cancer or something like that yet. Okay, everything happens, yes, but like that.
Dr. Flowers, how did the Chernobyl incident change global attitudes towards nuclear power, especially after the 80s? I mean, but obviously before that, it was seen as like the next big thing. Would you say there was a shift in attitude towards it?
Well, it was very varied. I mean, there was only two things possible: business as usual, which, for example, happened in a country like France, where at that time something like 70% of the electricity generated coming from nuclear power. France in the 1970s launched a very big nuclear power, nuclear energy program, and many people had been living already for some time near nuclear reactors, which were of a completely different type. So the different countries would put out different messages about this. Britain, for example, was in the throes of deciding whether the last nuclear reactor ever to be built and completed in Britain, the last one to be completed, was Sizewell B. It was completed in 1995. And the decision for that to go ahead was actually made the year after. And the political impact, the way that was considered and viewed in Britain, was such as to recognize that if you're not building a reactor that has the situation or can create the situation of Chernobyl, then why not go ahead? And that was the decision that was taken by the then Thatcher government in 1986 through to 87 after a very long inquiry. In other countries like Germany, there were halts, and Sweden, there were temporary cessations, America too, but in many cases more for commercial reasons. So it was a very varied approach. It certainly didn't stop China pressing ahead, as they have done, because I remember talking about them doing some of their early planning for the Guangdong reactor in the late 80s. And Chinese, while Britain was building its one reactor, that building commenced around 87, 88, there was a lot of interest around the world. And I remember that in Britain, that we were just getting ahead and doing a bit of building of nuclear power. A lot of countries have since drawn back and regretted they did cease their programs, more from the point of view that unless you have an appropriate renewables program in place, you're liable to be buffeted by all the issues that might surround oil and petrochemicals. So very varied reactions right across the world. Many just continued as before, a few had temporary suspensions, some very small number even longer. So there was an impact, but only in some countries.
Dr. Alan Flowers and Professor Maxim Jasinski, thank you very much for taking our questions. Thank you very much for your time. Hope you have a good rest of your day.
You too. Thanks.
Thank you.